with the first pick, we're going division by division and looking at the most impact-ready rookie classes, the players who can be highly productive this season. A year ago, it was names like Brian Thomas Jr., Brock Bowers, Jaden Daniels, and Jared Verse. Today, we'll give you some names to know for 2025, and we're starting in the AFC. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Rand Carthon. This is episode 259, and Rand, because I know you're wondering, there are 338 days to the 2026 NFL draft. Nobody cares, but that's our little shtick we do here. How you doing, man?
Good, man. You see I'm rocking my Niners hat today in lieu of our 8U boys flag football team winning the championship this weekend, 11-0. I was the get-back coach / D coordinator on the staff. So shout out to the boys of the Brentwood Blaze 8U's championship team.
You're like the guy, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, but that followed Mario from Oregon to the U, except you don't have the curly mustache. You got the muscles, you don't have the curly mustache. You wear a schmedium shirt out there too? There it is. There it is, Sharon. He was just waiting to do that. Get back, get back. We're going to talk more about flag football at the end of the show because the NFL is voting on whether the players can play in the 2028 Olympics. And I want to talk to you about that because you have some insight because your girls and your boys are dominant in flag football in the state of Tennessee. So we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about some of these impact rookie classes and players in particular. We're going to start in the AFC South division you're quite familiar with. And I'll let you go first. You can give me a player or two that you think is going to be most impactful, and I'll even let you pick the teams too, and then I'll go and we'll have a conversation.
All right, so my thought process with this was just given the names that we don't talk about enough. We know all the first-round picks. Felt like we've talked about these guys ad nauseum, but I just want to give some other names, and they're names that are familiar, but names that hadn't been brought up quite as much. So I'll start with Kevin Winston Jr., the safety that the Titans drafted in the third round. Got hurt this year, was a guy that was expected to be one of the premier safeties in this draft class, but unfortunately he got hurt and was unable to, play a full season. But I think this guy's going to come in very early. He's going to compete for that third role. I know defensive coordinator Denard Wilson likes to use a big nickel safety type that could play down in the box, and I think he's going to fit into that perfectly. And I think when it's all said and done, he's going to give them a Kevin Byard type of feel, another third-round safety that's going to have a chance to make an impact. My other guy that what I would say out of the AFC South would be my old stomping ground in Indianapolis, my man JT Tumalau. And if you look at what GM Chris Ballard has done with these edge guys, they spent a lot of resources at this edge position. And now JTT is coming in, and he's going to be paired with Latu and Kwity Paye, guys that have been there. And he's going to initially be the third rusher because they still have Samson Ebukam, who's returning off of an Achilles. And I think this guy with Kwity Paye entering the last year of his deal, he has a chance to be a starter for these guys for years to come.
Yeah, let's start with the JTT because it feels like Chris Ballard has a type, right? You talk about Kwity Paye, you talk about Laiatu Latu, and then, of course, they just drafted JTT. Feels like about 6'4", 265-ish, and those are the guys they targeted. They had Deo there, too. He's now elsewhere. And I just want to ask you this. So if you're coming down to – if you have a Kwity Paye or a Laiatu Latu on one side, what's the advantage in terms of the guys you like for your scheme to getting JTT as opposed to, say, a Donovan Ezraku who's about 245-ish or so?
Well, if you look at the division, at some point, the weather changes and you're going to have to be able to play physical. And that's what this division is about. It's about being physical. And so what Chris Ballard is looking for with these edge guys are guys that can set physical edges. Laiatu Latu was more known as a finesse kind of rusher that was slippery. But then think about Kwity Paye. He is a physical edge-setting guy that can create knockback. And as well as Samson Ebukam, a heavy-handed, strong guy that sets physical edges. And this is what JTT does. And, if I can say JTT is kind of a mixture of both of those guys, of Laiatu Latu from understanding how to use his hands and be slippery as a rusher, but set physical edges like Kwity Paye in the run game.
Yeah, JTT feels like a guy that when we're going to look back in a few years and maybe we were just overthinking it, and for whatever their shortcomings were, he slipped into the second round and shouldn't. I want to go back to Kevin Winston Jr. as well. You mentioned he had that knee injury, suffered, I think, halfway through the second game of the season. So he didn't play, and he told our own producer Debo at the Combine, Debo ran into him as a Penn State alum. He said he was going to run 4.5 at his workout, and he ran 4.5 at his workout. So I think if he had played the entire season, he would have gone higher than round 3. They had a really good secondary with him and Jalen Reed, who was also drafted. But those are 2 good guys. I appreciate you giving love to guys that maybe we didn't talk about as much as perhaps we should have or time allowed. You know me. I'm taking the low-hanging fruit in the AFC South, and I'm starting with Tyler Warren, JTT's teammate in Indianapolis. And I went with Tyler Warren for this reason. And my whole motto is don't overthink it. You can tell I have 2 teenage kids because I have to say that a lot. They're boys. If they're girls, they'd probably be a little smarter. But in terms of helping out Anthony Richardson, fingers crossed that he gets it this year, Tyler Warren feels like the easiest way to do that outside of a run game. You agree with that?
Absolutely, and it gives them a safety valve underneath. And that's what they teach you that. The best friend to a young quarterback is a run game and a safety valve underneath. And that's typically the tight end. And so you now get that. And I mean, when you look at what the weapons that they have at receiver and with Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, all that was missing was a 3-down tight end, like Tyler Warren is going to give him a chance to have a guy on the field full time that he trusts and he can put the ball in his hands in a variety of ways.
So when we had the conversation about Colson Loveland being the better athlete, I don't think anyone would disagree with that. You have any concerns about Tyler Warren transitioning to the next level? Because I thought the jump he made last season was one of the biggest jumps outside of maybe Cam Ward for players helping their draft stock. He's not going to run as fast as Colson Loveland. He's probably not as twitchy in space, but he feels like a much more traditional wide tight end that can do a little bit of everything and do it at a high level. Are you okay with the where his athleticism bar is currently set?
Yeah, because I think about it. We're shifting at the tight end position, right? Because so many of these guys now are former wide receivers who may not have run fast, and now we're moving them to the tight end spot. So the tight end position is quote unquote becoming more athletic, but every team still wants that wide tight end. And that's why at the roster cut down, or even at the start of free agency, everyone is looking for that wide tight end. And now the Colts have a guy that they could play on all 3 downs.
Yeah, I love this pick, and I think it's going to be as impactful as possible for Anthony Richardson. My other guy, and this is a little off the radar, I talked about him a lot during the draft process, and he had fumbling issues at Virginia Tech, and he would have gone higher, I think, had he been more ball secure. Bashul Tootin, the running back out of Virginia Tech, went to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They also circled back in round 7 and got LaQuinn Allen, a guy from Syracuse. But I love the idea, and we just talked about it with a young quarterback. Trevor Lawrence has been around the block a few more times than Anthony Richardson, but he has yet to put it all together, in part because of injuries. You see here, he ran a 4.32. And by the way, Bashul played most of last season with a knee brace on and still ran a 4.32. But I love his versatility. I love the fact that he's maybe undersized, if you want to call him that, but he can run between the tackles, he can bounce it, and then he's an asset in the pass game. In just under a minute here, let me ask you this. How do you coach out fumbling issues in a young running back, Rand?
Well, part of fumbling, obviously you got to have the 7 points of pressure. Shout out to Bobby Turner, one of the greatest running back coaches of all time. He teaches the 7 points of pressure, but there comes a point where fumbling becomes mental, because you're thinking about it. And so that's the part that I think is the biggest hurdle to get over, is the mental part of fumbling.
Yeah, and I think if he gets over that, it's going to be lights out, because I think that running game is going to be transformed. They're probably going to move on from Etienne, perhaps before the start of the season. They have these 2 young running backs. They have their new coaching staff in Liam Cohen. And then, of course, they have Trevor Lawrence looking to make that leap. All right, that's it for the AFC South. When we come back, we're going to take our attention to the AFC North, look at some draft impactful rookies, looking ahead to 2025. We'll do that right after the break. All right, Rand, let's make our way to the AFC North. I think we have to do a side podcast of me, you, and Sharon, producer Sharon, who's a Miami fan, and all he does in the break is take a verbal whooping from you, Florida Gator, but we'll save that for later. That's a little fun. It builds up my spirits, at least. All right, let's go to the AFC North, and I stole Mr. Carthon, your guy in Baltimore, but I'll let you start. You have 2 guys from Baltimore, and you took the low hanging fruit this time. Who you got for the Ravens?
Well, of course, I'm going to say my son. That goes without saying. I got to go with Malachi Starks. And I won't even spend that much time on him. I just think this guy's he's going to be an impact rookie. I think he will be in the running early on for Defensive Rookie of the Year, just because of the type of defense they play in and how they're going to plan to use him. And again, he gets put in a rock and roll situation. But my other guy is Mike Green. And again, the rich get richer. Like, how does this guy fall to, of all teams, Baltimore in the second round? And I get it. He had some off the field concerns and those things, but we're talking about, in my opinion, the most natural rusher in this draft class. I think he just had the know-how, and he led the nation in sacks. And I think this guy's going to continue to come in. And you put him, in the same room with Odafe Owe, who had 10 sacks last year. I think Kyle Van Noy even had some. I think he might have been a Pro Bowler last year, or the last couple of years. And now you put this young guy in that room. Like, this is going to be a really good room, and they're going to be able to employ three guys coming at you at all times.
Yeah, as a Steelers fan, this is how you know it's a great draft for the Ravens, because I hate it. I mean, they absolutely crushed it. And to the point about Mike Green, he feels like where the Ravens were hoping to get David Ojabo and Odafe Owe by year 1 or 2, Mike Green comes in ready to go. Now, the off-field stuff, he's got to figure that stuff out. On the field, he is as juiced up as he was probably no one played harder 60 snaps per game last season than Mike Green, as far as I saw. And then you have Malachi Starks, who they took in the first round, and you pair him with Kyle Hamilton, and that's a wrap. Like, you can't draw back to pass because you can't throw in the secondary, and then you also have those edge rushers getting after it. So big issues for the rest of the AFC North. Great news for the Baltimore Ravens, of course. I went with Malachi Starks as well. Again, low-hanging fruit Wilson was going to take that layup. I'm not a three-point shooter, Rand, so I got to take the easy baskets. And again, that makes sense. But also, a pick I didn't like at the time, and we were together for the draft weekend, so you know this, but I'm going to go with Caleb Johnson, Iowa running back, third-round pick of the Steelers, because they moved on from Najee Harris. They have Jaylen Warren there, who is more of a change of pace back, and it's going to be a dual-headed running back situation in Pittsburgh like it is most places. But what I like about Caleb Johnson is that he fits what Arthur Smith, the offensive coordinator, wants to do, running those wide zones, and he excelled at that at Iowa. I think he's going to excel at that at the next level. Not a burner, but again, we've talked about Le'Veon Bell. He weighed 20 pounds more coming out of Michigan State than he did when he's in his prime in Pittsburgh. So let me ask you this. How do you like the marriage of Arthur Smith, the OC, with Caleb Johnson, who's a bigger, more physical back? And a lot of times we don't see these big physical backs coming into the draft as often as we used to.
I trust Arthur's eye, especially with those mid-round picks at that position. And the one thing I've learned, having been under that Shanahan tree, just in terms of the running back position and that scheme, it's not a matter of where you get the guy. It's marrying, the right guy with the scheme. And I think if you look back into what we did in San Francisco, we drafted Elijah Mitchell in the 6th round, out of Louisiana Lafayette, and he came in the first game of his rookie year because Raheem Mostert got hurt, and eventually led us in rushing that year, almost 1,000 yards as a 6th-round pick. So it's not necessarily who the player is or, where the guy gets drafted. It's marrying the right fit, for the scheme.
Hey, you mentioned the 49ers. I want to ask you about this. It feels like there was a concerted effort to draft as many running backs as possible in rounds 3 through 7, because you took a flyer on some guys. I can't remember the young man's name out of LSU in round 3 a few years ago that I thought was a pretty high pick. And then you get guys like Elijah Mitchell, and you seem to unearth these gems. Is there an effort to find as many running backs that fits what Kyle wants to do as possible, or is that's just how the board fell for a few years in a row?
No, if you know one thing about those guys, they really studied the running back position. That was one of Mike McDaniel's specialties. And the guy I mentioned before, Bobby Turner. Bobby Turner's been coaching in this scheme, for over 30 years. And he was with Mike Shanahan, started there with Mike Shanahan, and eventually moved on to Kyle. And so he's one of the best, if not the best, running back coaches in this league still to this day, and finding a way to unearth guys, whether early or late.
Yeah, and obviously it's worked, and it's worked with guys drafted in the 7th round. It's worked with Christian McCaffrey and everyone in between. And, I forgot. I should have mentioned this at the top. Last week we did a podcast on this very channel, and I believe media member Ryan Wilson said Brock Purdy needs to get north of $50 million, and longtime front office person Brian Carthon said, nah, he's getting. So I think the fair thing to do, I think you said about 47 or whatever. I said 50. I think you need to pay me the difference, and we'll call it even.
Well, how about this? How about we wait till the real numbers come out, right? Because one thing I know, the Niners have a history of they have the balloon year in the final year of the deal. typically pushes those averages up. So I'm still waiting to see what the actual real numbers is. And then we'll start the debt from there. I'll find a way
to put
things together for you.
All right. Well, you can give me a balloon here, split the difference until the actual numbers come in, and I'll feel good for a couple of weeks. And then when the reality hits, I'll take my $5.37 and put it in the bank. All right. Great job by Brock Purdy either way, because they had to pay him. I felt like that was an easy one. The one thing I want to mention, too, before we take a quick break here, I didn't mention it last segment with AFC South, but I thought the Browns as a whole maybe have the most impactful draft class. We know about the quarterbacks. We talked those guys to death. I didn't necessarily love the idea of taking 2 running backs, but I understand it. You take Quinshon Judkins first, and then you take Dylan Sampson a few rounds later, and those guys are both going to play. And then you take Carson Schlesinger as well at the top of round 2 because JOK's future is in doubt, at least in the short term, at the linebacker position. I feel like they've done a lot of things to better themselves, but Rand, at the end of the day, you got to figure out who the quarterback is, right?
Oh, absolutely. And just to follow up, because like you were saying, there was a couple picks in there that you didn't necessarily like out of the gate. I didn't necessarily like the Carson Schlesinger pick at that time because I thought there were more pressing needs in my mind at pick 33. Again, we weren't privy to where JOK was going to end up. They had a plan for it, and boom. So I was looking at it. Mason Graham, he's going to start out of the gate. Now with the injury to JOK, Carson Schlesinger is going to start. I feel like Quinshon Judkins is going to beat out Jerome Ford as the every down back. So now you got another starter. Harold Fannin is going to play in 12 personnel with David Njoku and is going to be a problem. And then Dylan Sampson, he's going to be the third running back and likely be the kickoff returner. So there's going to be a role for him. And whoever you like at quarterback, whether it's Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel, one of those guys is going to end up starting for him at some point this year. And now you're looking at an entire draft class that's contributed. Most people crushed this draft class in terms of saying they didn't like it. But I think by the end of the year, maybe year 2, year 3, we're going to look back and say this was one of the best draft classes.
Yeah, and Andrew Berry just signed an extension last summer, so he probably felt a little security there. And obviously, he's having conversations with the owner throughout the process and the coaching staff and everyone else. But I think that's how you arrive at a point where you can take these 2 quarterbacks with the understanding that one or both may very well end up playing this season. I would imagine both of them are going to end up playing and probably both end up starting at some point as they try to figure it out. So, look, man, the Ravens are the best team in the division for now. This draft class wasn't going to determine whether the Browns won the Super Bowl or not, so I understand why they're building. I understand why they trade down. They get that first-round pick next year as well, which we didn't even talk about as part of the reason to like this draft class. So I think with the hindsight of a couple of weeks, maybe a month from the draft, it looks a little better than maybe it did in the moment. I can say the same thing about the Steelers class now that I'm trying to hop on the Caleb Johnson bandwagon. All right, we're halfway through this thing here. AFC South, AFC North in the books. When we come back, going to go to the AFC East, talk about all those teams and maybe a surprise team that's not named the Buffalo Bills, and we'll talk about those guys right after this. All right, let's make our way to the AFC East, talk about some impact rookies in that division. And Rand, you went down the rabbit hole on this one. No layups for Rand here. No low-hanging fruit. I love both these guys. I'll let you decide who you want to go with first.
So let's start with one of my other favorite guys in this draft class. I'm starting to sound like Ryan Wilson saying everybody's my favorite. But Malachi Moore, for the Jets. This guy's a pure football player. Everyone has talked about him, compared him to Brian Branch, which I think is true. To use Ryan Wilson's words, let's just not overthink it. It's not that serious. We know what his shortcomings are, but if you turn on the tape, you don't see those shortcomings, right? So I think this guy's going to come in. I think he's going to start week 1. I think he's going to come in, beat out Tony Adams for the spot. And then we're talking about Steve Wilks and Aaron Glenn. They will know exactly how to use this guy. And then he has as one of his position coaches, pass game coordinator Chris Harris, who played, 8+ years in this league in that safety role and has had some, really good secondaries at every stop he's been. So this guy's in a room where he's going to be well coached, and I think you're going to bring out his best. So Malachi Moore was my one. And then I'm going to go and steal a line from Chris Berman. I think he used to say that kickers are people too. And so I'm going to go to the New England Patriots and my man, Andres Borgadas. And I think, again, we're talking about taking a kicker, drafting a kicker, which is kind of out of the realm a little bit, right? But then you got to think about who the head coach is, and it's Mike Vrabel. And Mike Vrabel, being a defensive-minded guy, really values special teams. And so we were at this pro day, and he brought out a lot of special teams coordinators there for the day. And we were kind of in awe that he was going first, but it made sense once you saw the coaches there. We're talking about a strong leg guy. I think he had a career long of 56 yards on a field goal. His field goal percentage increased every year he was in school, and he's a guy that can kick off, and his kickoffs actually improved. Now I think he still is going to need some, a little bit of work there just in terms of kickoffs, being able to create touchbacks. But with this new format, I mean, all he has to do is hang it and let guys cover it.
Yeah, you and I talked about it at the time at the Miami Pro Day. That turned out to be the Andreas Borregales Pro Day, not the Cam Ward Pro Day, because they led off with Andreas. He went there and booming balls from midfield and halfway up the uprights. And it was pretty impressive to see. You don't often say that about special teamers. But we got our money's worth of that Pro Day. They had the long snapper out there for 15 minutes. They had the gunners out there. They had everybody and their brother working out. And it was a great showing by all those guys for sure. Malachi Moore, also incredibly smart. Maybe there's something name your kids Malachi, because between Malachi Starks and Malachi Moore, two of the smartest players in this draft class. Malachi Moore isn't quite the athlete, but as you're talking about, he is always where he's supposed to be. Team leader. I know you talk about the Vandy game. Look, man, everyone has their low moments on the football field, and Malachi's talked about that. But I think you're exactly right. He's going to have a chance to come in and play right away for those New York Jets. I also want to point out that our buddy Rick Spielman, I was watching some of the behind the scenes in their draft process with the new OG Darren Muji and the new head coach Aaron Glenn. Looks like Rick's had the biggest office at that facility. I don't know what that's about. But if I'm Muji or AG, I'm having a conversation with Mr. Woody. But that's a conversation for another time. We'll have to ask Rick about that later. All right. I'm going to head up. Actually, I'm going to go west of here about 2.5 hours and talk about the Buffalo Bills. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Bills because you can go back and listen to us talk up the Bills draft class from top to bottom. But their first-round pick, Max Harrison, I think has a chance to come in right away and contribute and do it at a high level. We've seen that with Devin Witherspoon a couple years ago. There are a handful of guys last year that came in and contributed right away. Renardo Green, Drew Phillips, a couple other guys that really had good rookie campaigns as cornerbacks. And I think Max Harrison in that system with the 4 other defensive players they drafted in rounds 2 through 5 are going to be able to contribute early on. But I want to spend some time in Miami because we haven't spent a lot of time talking about the Dolphins. They didn't have a ton of picks. And one of the picks they took was 7th-round pick Quinn Ewers, which obviously was a surprise. But I'm going to go with Jonah Savaiinaea. They traded up and gave up some capital to go get him. Play tackle at Arizona, is probably going to kick inside to guard for Miami. And I sort of like what they're doing. They have Austin Jackson at right tackle. Jonah's going to play right guard. They have James Daniels, who they signed in the offseason at left tackle. And then Patrick Paul, who's going to have a chance to win that left tackle job. And the reason I like this pick in particular, Rand, is because it solidifies the middle of that offensive line. And this offense, more than any other we've talked about, it feels like if Tua's not a part of it, Mike McDaniel can't dial the same plays he can with whoever the backup's going to end up being. This time it's Zach Wilson and Quinn Ewers. Previously it was Kyler Thompson. What do you think about the selection and the immediate impact ability for Jonah Savaiinaea kicking inside for Tua in that offense?
So when they initially drafted him, I was kind of questionable. I think I was a little low on the terms of the pick, just for fit. And I'm thinking about Mike McDaniel's scheme, the wide zone scheme, being athletic and get out. But the one thought it brought me back to was when we were in San Francisco and we drafted, drawing the blank, Aaron Banks. We drafted Aaron Banks out of Notre Dame, who was a bigger body like this. And I remember getting calls, getting texts saying, hey, are you guys changing the scheme? He's not a scheme fit. And Banks went on to start for numerous years before he just signed as a free agent with the Green Bay Packers this year. And so I understand what Mike is doing. He is solidifying the center of that offensive line. And what does that do? That gives Tua the ability to step up, to step into throws now and allow, because he's a shorter guy. If you think about how the New Orleans Saints built their lines for Drew Brees, they will solidify the middle, allow him to take deep drops and then climb the pocket because the pocket was secure. And the only way you can secure and set a firm pocket is by having bigger, stronger guys in the middle.
Yeah, and obviously when Tua's not in there, that offense looks completely different. I want to ask you about, they had a lot of good picks, and this is I think one of the draft classes in this division we haven't spent a lot of time on, but that could be pretty impactful pretty early on. Kenneth Grant, they drafted him at 13, perhaps earlier than people thought, but I think he's going to be a really good player in the middle of that defense. Jordan Phillips out of Maryland had a great season, great Shrine Bowl, did have shorter arms, and that could be a thing, of course. But I want to talk to you about Ollie Gordon, the big back out of Oklahoma State, another big back-to-back segments here. Talked about Caleb Johnson earlier. But how does that fit in the Mike McDaniel scheme? Mike McDaniel, of course, was in Washington with Kyle and all those guys, Matt LaFleur, Sean McVay. And then when you have Devon Achane, Jalen Wright, and then Ollie Gordon is sort of a change-up. How's that going to work, and how Mike McDaniel likes to run the ball?
It's not going to change anything because, again, I know Mike McDaniels, and I know how he studies running backs. And because he was in the room with Bobby Turner, as he was coming up as a young assistant coach. And so he puts a lot of time into the running back position, evaluating the running back position. So if you can, every back that they take, you can almost be certain that they are a scheme fit, and Mike will know how to use them. Ollie Gordon's just going to be a bigger guy. Like you said, Devin Achane isn't the biggest guy, explosive, big play, X-play type of guy, but now you got to have that 4-minute runner. And when you mentioned earlier about us taking Ty Davis-Price in the third round, the thought process there was getting bigger at the position while still being able to run the scheme.
Thank you for remembering his name, too. Kenneth Grant, Jonas Avenaya, Ollie Gordon, and even Jordan Phillips. That feels like, intentional or not, a statement that we need to get tougher in November, December, January. And whether it's perception or not, that once the cold weather rolls in, it feels like the Dolphins aren't as quote-unquote tough as the other teams in that division. Is that fair to say that these guys are going to provide some girth and toughness, or is that just media chit-chat and the reality is different than that?
No, I think they definitely look to address that, right? Because that's been the knock. That's been the knock on this Dolphins team, is when they're matched up against teams that are getting your face and want to bring you out to the middle of the ring and have a Larry Holmes versus George Foreman type match, that they're not built for that, right? And again, the New England Patriots added Mike Vrabel. We're talking about a heavyweight fight. And then you look at Buffalo. Buffalo is going to be built to have a heavyweight fight. And then now the Jets add Aaron Glenn, who wants to bring everything a heavyweight fight and bring it to the center of the ring. So in order for them to be able to survive and compete, you got to be able to have those type of guys to bring to the center of the ring and just slug it out.
Yeah, I think if everyone stays healthy, and that's a big if when you're talking about football, I think the Miami Dolphins will be better than perhaps we're giving them credit for. This division could sneaky be pretty good, especially with Vrabel, as you mentioned, now in New England. Drake May going into year 2. We'll see what happens in New York, and we know who Buffalo is, of course. All right, let's take one more break, Rand. We'll come back and hit the AFC West and talk about some impact rookies we've got our eye on as we look ahead to 2025. We'll do that right after this break. All right, Rand, AFC West time. Hit the other 3 divisions already, of course. As I look here on my notes, I see you stealing one of my other guys for your guys. Both of my guys. Oh, good Lord. All right, who you got for the AFC West impact rookies? And you can tell me what team they're on as well.
All right, well, let's start with the Kansas City Chiefs and running back Brashard Smith. Again, shout out to Sharon. He was a former Cane, but he wised up and he left and went to SMU. So we'll take him back from Sharon and the Miami Hurricanes. But I'm looking at a guy who, if you look at who they currently have, right? So I'm looking at my notes. You have Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt, and Elijah Mitchell. All 3 of those guys are really good runners, but they're volume runners. And this is where Brashard comes in as a change of pace guy who's making the transition from receiver to running back. And so he's going to give them that kind of change of pace, third down type of guy that we know Andy Reid loves. And my comparison for him, especially in this scheme, is Jet McKinnon. And Jet McKinnon played a really vital role in all those teams that they've had that went to the Super Bowl, went to the AFC Championship. And I think this kid will have the same type of impact. And then my next guy, going out to Vegas and looking at the Raiders receiver, Dante Thornton. And again, I'm looking at him from a standpoint of him being big, fast, and explosive, which is what the Raiders are currently missing right now. And we know Geno Smith now is their starting quarterback. He likes to play action and take those shots downfield, and now they have a guy to go to. We're talking about Jacoby Myers. They drafted Ryan's son. I'll let you talk about him. Probably going to talk about him out of TCU. But all those guys, to me, are between the numbers, short to intermediate type guys. And now you're going to add in Dante Thornton to be able to take the top off. I see this guy. It doesn't matter if he's going to have 30 catches or 40 catches, but I see him being a guy that's going to average anywhere from 16 plus yards per catch and be their big play guy.
You know, as you guys make fun of me for loving everybody, I feel like I'm the Father Abraham of NFL draft coverage. I don't know if you remember that song in Sunday school, Father Abraham had many sons. I got all these people out there that I love, and they're all ballers. I love them all. I love them all. Even Sharon. I thought for a moment that Sharon had transferred to SMU because he couldn't take the U anymore, but you meant Brashard Smith. Brashard Smith wised up. Sharon hung around and had to take it. I thought Brashard would go higher than the 7th round, and part of that may be due to the fact that he's learning a new position. But I think he's going to get better as a runner, and the pass catching speaks for itself. He was a wide receiver at the U his first few years there. I'm going to go with the same two teams, different players. Let's go. I'll start with the Chiefs first. Jalen Royals, who I also thought would get drafted higher. He went early day 3. I thought he had a chance to be a second-round pick. Had an injury last season at Utah State, but he feels like when you're talking about what these Chiefs wide receivers look like, they look like Jalen Royals. You have Rasheed Rice there. They drafted Xavier Worthy last year. He's a little undersized. He's more in the Hollywood Brown mold. You have Juju Smith-Schuster, and Jalen Royals ran incredibly well. And I think he's a little, maybe a few pounds less than what Rasheed Rice is, but he's a bigger receiver. And I think he's going to eat early on in that scheme because he's not going to be asked to do everything. And then you add him and Brashard Smith, two legit pass catching options for what they want to do offensively with, of course, Patrick Mahomes. And then for the Raiders, you talk about Dante Thornton Jr., who reminded me a little bit of Martavis Bryant, not quite as polished coming out of Clemson, but just run that 4-3 straight ahead, keep going, running those go routes and stretch out the defense. And then you let guys like Jack Besh eat underneath. And Jack Besh is almost a slot/F tight end in terms of his size. He didn't run through the pre-draft process, so he's probably not a 4-4 guy. As you know, ran the old saying, fast guys run. He didn't run, so I thought he played fast enough. He has fantastic hands. He's a really good route runner. And you couple that with Ashton Genty. You mentioned Dante Thornton Jr., and then you talk about Geno Smith. And, oh, by the way, Chip Kelly. And this offense is going to look completely different than what it did a year ago. I'll ask you this. Does the offense have enough firepower to make up for a defense that's trying to get better?
Short answer, yes. And you look at what Chip did when he was in Philly, and now get it. You had Jeremy Maclin. You had what's my man out of Cal?
Deshaun Jackson. Deshaun Jackson.
How could I forget Deshaun Jackson? You had Deshaun Jackson. You had Riley Cooper, right? You had all these guys. But if you think about who they had at quarterback, they had Nick Foles at quarterback. And what Chip's system was when he came into the league, he brought something to the league that they hadn't seen, which most people, when they felt like stretching the field, it was stretching it vertical. Chip stretched the field horizontally, and he created space for all those guys to run through. So now you got a run game with Ashton Genty, right? And then you got Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is still going to be your number one receiver. And then you add Jacoby Myers, Dante Thornton, and then Jack Besh in that. And they're going to all Geno has to do is play point guard and get the ball into those open holes, those stretched out zones, and allow those guys to put it on them accurately and allow those guys to go make plays.
They also got Charles Grant, pick 99, the developmental left tackle out of William & Mary. Developmental in the sense he hasn't played a lot. He's incredibly athletic. And also got Caleb Rogers along the offensive line. Drafted two defensive tackles, Tonka Hemingway and J.J. Pegues, who was a former tight end, also ran the ball. I think he scored 7 touchdowns last year for Ole Miss. But in terms of the draft class that I like the best in this division, it was the Chiefs. And we talked a lot about the Bills and the Ravens crushing their drafts. I don't know if they made up any ground in Kansas City because Kansas City went crazy with Jalen Royals. They drafted Josh Simmons in the first round. Brashard Smith, we talked about. Omar Norman-Lott, interior edge rusher or interior defensive lineman. Next to Chris Jones is going to be a difference maker. Ashton Gelati feels like what their edge rushers look like. So I was impressed with that. And we talked about your most impactful draft class. We talked about that group earlier in the Cleveland Browns. Has any of these teams made up enough ground on the Chiefs to get a little closer to scaring them, or are we not quite there yet?
As long as they got that man back there, to quote Mark Jackson, mama, there goes that man. and I mean, Mahomes gives you a chance to win. But again, and we talked about this on a previous pod, I do think the window is closing, right? Because, now Kelsey's, more than likely is going to retire after this season. And then how much ball is Chris Jones going to play? So that window is slowly but surely closing. And this is the time for teams to make up ground and really. So when that drop off comes, you got to put your foot on their neck and really accelerate, because you can't give them a chance to come back.
As long as Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are there, I don't think it matters whether Travis Kelce is there or not. It's funny because every year at the Combine, Andy Reid sits down and talks with us, and every year he and our buddy Pete Prisco are about the same age, and they have a conversation, if they're going to come back for one more year. So he and Peter have this agreement. And I think as long as Andy keeps coming back, that's a problem as long as Patrick's there. And Patrick, he ain't gotten worse. I mean, you talk about the windows closing, but that doesn't have to do with Patrick or Andy, does it?
No, absolutely not. Again, it's just the other pieces around, right? Because there are times where the defense has had to make plays to carry this team, right? And then there are times where Patrick is, inflicted with an injury, an ankle or shoulder, or, whatever the case may be, and someone has to be there for the pick-me-up, right? And so that's why I like the Chiefs in the way they're built. They play a total team game, and everyone has a point in which they have to step up. The question is going to be, especially you look at the receiver position, you got the Hollywood Browns, you got the Juju Smith-Schusters. At some point, those guys are going to be out of there. And then, Rashee Rice is going to have to finally grow up and, become a player that they could count on, on an every day, every game basis. And can he do it? We'll see. But they're going to have to, these young guys are going to really have to step up if they want to, elongate this run that they're on.
Yeah, you talked about Patrick Mahomes occasionally missing some time with injuries. We've seen the Chad Henneys come out there. We've seen Carson Wentz, glimpses of him. Do you know who the backup quarterbacks, plural, are in Kansas City right now? I just had to look.
Dang it. I saw it 2 weeks ago. No, just riddle me, Batman, and tell me.
Gardner Minshew and Bailey Zappi are currently the backups to Patrick Mahomes, which is crazy town, USA. All right, let's take another quick break here, and we'll come back, and we'll talk a little fantasy football and what it means for NFL players in the 2028 Olympics, and we'll do that right after this break. All right, Rand, before we get out of here, got a couple things I want to run by you. That's the GM of the podcast here. I'll let you decide whether you want to talk about the tush-push vote or the idea of reseeding the playoffs, which was brought to the table by the Detroit Lions based on not so much whether you win the division, but on records. We'll get you going here.
Well, we can talk about the reseeding because I would absolutely not vote for that. And for me, I just come from the school of thought you win the games you're supposed to win. And you don't have to worry about anything, right? And so sometimes your divisions are going to be tough. That's just the luck of the draw. And something that, we were kind of talking about it a little bit. If you look at when the 49ers lost all of their quarterbacks in that NFC Championship game, and then the next year the league came and they reinstituted the third quarterback rule, like that was the first time something like that had happened in, 1,000 games, let's just say. And so, it was a knee-jerk reaction. Like, we don't have to do the overcorrection. Now, if this is something that continuously shows up, then maybe, look into it. But again, like, win the games you're supposed to win, and you don't have to worry about reseeding. I mean, in the playoffs, they're all good teams. And if a team won their division, regardless of their record, like, they shouldn't be punished for it.
Yeah, here's the 2024 AFC playoff matchups if you're watching. I would like to have the Steelers not have played the Ravens in the first round but that's exactly, that's how it worked out. And that's because the Ravens won the divisions and the Steelers were the sixth seed because they lost 5 straight down the stretch. And to further your point, we were talking about this in the break. So the Rams won the division with a losing record back, I think, Sam Bradford's rookie season, maybe 2010. And then the Beastquake year in that game, the Seahawks beat the Saints at home. That Seahawks team lost more games than they won. But here's the thing. The Saints went out there and they lost. Like, they lost that playoff game. You could argue that it was on the road in Seattle. But, if you're the better team, you should win those games, even with whatever the point difference is, 3.5 points on the road if you're a bookmaker. All right, let's turn to something a little more exciting, at least as far as I'm concerned. You have a family full of flag football champions, both daughters and sons. And the NFL is going to vote later today. They expected to pass about whether these NFL players can play in the 2028 Olympics in flag football. And one of the rules I wanted to run by you is this. You have a limit of one player per NFL team on each national team. So you can't stockpile the team with the Ravens, the Bills, and the Chiefs on the USA team, for example. So I would imagine, Rand, that the quarterback is the most important position. But flag football, maybe that's different. Maybe it's a running back, maybe it's a wide receiver. Who's the most important position on a flag football team if you're building from scratch?
You got to have the quarterback. And again, we're talking about the full rules, right? So we led off the show congratulating our 8U flag team that won. Now we're 8U, so we don't have a rusher. So you can't blitz the quarterback. And so in the upper divisions, you're allowed to rush the quarterback. And so I would imagine in this, in this Olympic type setting that you're going to be able to rush the quarterback. So the quarterback has to be a guy that can run. And then you got to factor in, is there the no run zone or is there a run at any time? Because there are certain points on the field where the quarterback can't run. So you got to have a guy that's elusive, that if he's in the no run zone, you got to evade, try to move, scramble, find someone open. And then while the guy's still pursuing you, you may have to make him miss twice. And so to me, you got that quarterback position is probably the most important position in flag football.
All right. So you don't want a pocket passer is what I'm hearing. Who's your first overall pick on your USA flag football team?
It would have to be, to me, it comes down to two people, and I'm looking at either Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray.
Oh, Kyler. You know who I was thinking about? Kyler's a good one. I was thinking about Jaden Daniels just because he's skinny. Like Lamar's a little thicker, so there's an opportunity to grab the flag maybe. But I think Lamar and Kyler are probably a little twitchier than Jaden, but I think it's close. Height doesn't matter so much probably?
No.
Because you can see. And then you just stock it with a bunch of college kids that aren't quote-unquote NFL players. I mean, there are a ton of guys that can run 4.3s that can do what you need to do. Second most important position is probably wide receiver.
Yeah, you got to have a wide receiver, somebody that's elusive, someone that can make plays, whether you're, getting them the ball quick or someone that can catch the ball downfield and make people miss. Some of the guys I thought about, I wrote down from a receiver standpoint. Now, again, this is off the beaten path because everyone is going to say, oh, give me Jamar Chase and give me Justin Jefferson. But again, I'm thinking about elusiveness, guys that are used to making cuts, start, stop. So the first guy that came to mind, and don't ask me why, was Kevontae Turpin out of Dallas. A smaller little jitterbug type, that can go. And then Tyreek Hill was another one.
Yeah, Turpin's a great one. He's a water bug. Like he's not a guy. He ain't Marvin Harrison Jr. out there. And Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe unless you're throwing jump balls, is not perhaps the body type you're looking for in that environment. But you know more about flag football than I do. All right, this is gonna be fun. So you don't know this, but I'm a numbers guy. So July 14th is when in 2028. That's when the Olympics start. The Summer Olympics start. So we have plenty of time to put together our team. And we may be beyond Lamar and Kyler. Jaden will still probably be in his prime. Tyreek will be well into his 30s. So Turpin will still be fast, even if he's 33 or whatever he is at the time. But the other thing I want to let you know, 338 days until the NFL draft, 1,151 days to the start of the 2028 Olympics. So get your mind right. Who knows, man? You play your cards right, Rand. You might be the get back coach on the Olympic team. So you need to keep doing them push-ups. What?
Hey, they need to call me for something, whether it's helping the committee put the team together, get back coach. I can excel in all those roles. And you'll be our analytics guy. I
was going to say, you know what? A year from now, we'll do a mock draft for the fantasy football or the flag football. In the meantime, subscribe to With the First Pick wherever you get your podcast. We will see you guys on Thursday to talk about the NFC Impact rookies.